The Amazing Digital Circus is the biggest web series in the entire world. This is the point that even common people who don't watch web shows know about it, making it mainstream. Though I never found it particularly interesting to check out compared to the regular, niche, older web shows I usually review and comics I read often. Instead, the only interest I have in this show and why I'm reviewing it is because it's the biggest web series in the world right now. It just ended a little while ago, and I wanted to know, why is this the biggest web show? What makes it so special that it's mainstream, and what merit does it have? After watching the show, I have a lot of thoughts, but one thing I know for certain is that though I get why it's so big, I'm not a fan. Overview. In case you're my dad watching this right now or something, Digital Circus is currently the most popular, well-known, and most mainstream web series by far in the entire world. The show, written by Gooseworks, came out about 3 years ago, and from its first episode it became a mainstream hit, as practically overnight it went down in history as one of the most successful web pilots ever. 4 million views in a day, to 10 million in a week, to 100 million in a month. These are numbers glitches never come close to achieving ever again, and every single episode of the show eclipses everything glitches made aside from 9 as of July 1st due to recency. This is why I won't be giving it a serious overview or partially explaining the plot, since unlike my other videos on niche things like Pretty Blood, Starters, or Pork Chop and Flat Screen, you as a watcher have definitely either seen the show or already watched another analysis and review. That's why I don't usually review things that are mainstream, since I'm a single voice out of thousands, but onto the review. Things I liked. The best aspects of the show have to do with presentational ones. Every episode feels as if you're watching a movie, and that's no surprise since Glitch hired professional animators like Kevin Temmer, a person that worked on the animation for Ice Age 5 and Spies in Disguise. Animation-wise, it's a complete masterpiece, and they have an insanely talented animation staff, and it really shows in scenes like Jax's crash out in 6, which perfectly fits the theatrical performance of the VA.
Oh, here we go! Because I didn't fight back, that means I secretly care about you?
And even simpler comedic moments like 2, where Pomni gets her limbs stretched out by the truck as she insults Jax. Putting this amount of effort into the animation and character body language mixed with the great voice work and a well-written show will make that good writing feel 10 times more effective. Musically, it's also just incredible. The main theme of Digital Circus is extremely memorable, impactful, and unique, and when it plays in the pilot at the end, it really helps build the feeling of dread Pomni felt when she realized she probably can't escape, mixed with the weirdly almost wholesome cartoony vibe of the circus. The juxtaposition the show's going for and how it looks and what it's trying to do is well done through the music. The one running the show also feels upbeat despite it being very dark, and it symbolizes directly how mad and fed up Caine is at this moment, which also fits with the juxtaposition the show is going for. Comedy-wise, the show is very funny and creative with a variety of jokes that utilize the simple characters extremely well. I analyzed the humor in episode 5's president scene because the show overall follows the style and quality of humor, starting from when Pomni is made president and she learns about Australia and New Zealand apparently being in a war, before Kinger brings her under the desk. The first joke is a baby headlamp, which is random humor and it makes sense given Kinger's character.
We all got briefs on our characters. I'm your assistant.
Is that a baby headlamp?
It randomly being a baby head isn't the funny part though, as this is set up for the dry humor where Pomni is distracted by it.
I'm sorry, what?
And we learn that everyone had a brief on their whole character, and who'd they be? That's when we learn Jax didn't give a brief to Pomni because he thought it'd be funny, and she sarcastically, dryly responds with,
"Thanks, Jax."
This scene so far has had multiple jokes, combining dry, random, awkward, and uncomfortable humor in just a few seconds, though it picks up the energy with Jax coming in and playing as an Australian terrorist.
Oi, mate! I'm an Australian extremist, and I've come to detonate this bomb that'll release all the world's deadliest spiders into...
This good performance makes sense for Jax's character, considering the fact that a massive part of his philosophy is performing or LARPing as a cartoon character, since that's what he believes he is, and that's the role he decides to play well here.
If you like it or not, all we are now is a bunch of cartoon characters. So what's the point of pretending we're not?
It's also funny due to the absurdity of the situation, unexpectedness, and the suddenness of Jax randomly coming in, and right afterwards a sex joke is made where Kinger's under the table with Pomni and he says, "Did I pick a bad time?" as in Jax. which is when it zooms out to Caine watching them on a CRT TV as if it's a sitcom randomly now with a laugh track, and Caine says he's a surprisingly good actor for being a vegan. The stacking absurdity, unexpectedness in the vegan line that's also a callback to a previous moment being correlated to his acting quality for no reason is what builds these scenes into being funnier and funnier. There are many kinds of jokes within this less than 30-second moment here, and its style of comedy purely focuses on being entertaining over everything, with tons of jokes a second, ensuring that if one doesn't land, like when Kinger says, "I'm not Jax," another will come so quickly that you won't really care and will laugh at the next instead. Digital Circus, especially after episode 1, found its footing fully with how it wants to tell jokes, and it does very well with these simple characters when it comes to being comedic. If this show was primarily intended to be a comedy over everything else, it would have worked in my opinion, but instead my issues come entirely from the fact that it tries to do more than this with its characters. The characters plus comedy and nothing's built. This show's comedy is amazing, but as I said, it purely focuses on being entertaining. It's the kind of comedy that relies on simple or one-note characters as opposed to more realistic and down-to-earth ones, where with those the comedy is less rapid-fire, random, and extreme, but it also does a second purpose of humanizing and developing the characters. In this way, Digital Circus is somewhat like Ren and Stimpy in its style of comedy. While Ren and Stimpy is funny for way different reasons, the core foundation of why jokes land in both shows are similar. Ren is a crazy one that's always seconds away from crashing out, and Stimpy is a stupid one. And the comedy is mostly derived from their reactions in various wacky episodic scenarios. It'll go from Ren and Stimpy exploring the wilderness of Canada to them trying to sew rubber nipples in a suburban neighborhood, because the point of the show is to entertain you and to make you laugh with the wild scenarios and simple characters, due to it being a pure comedy. Ren and Stimpy doesn't need complicated characters, and honestly, that'd make it worse because if it developed them more to the point where you'd feel bad for either one or anything, their ability to tell a vast variety of wild jokes is weakened, and it becomes a bit harder to imagine what Ren or Stimpy would do per scenario they're put in. And besides, when the show does have serious or disturbing moments, even they're made to be funny due to how disturbing they are, and how weird it feels, like the hand scene for a kid's show to have something like this. With the style of humor being similar to Ren and Stimpy, in a functionality sense only, it sure can be extremely funny and entertaining, but it doesn't develop the simplistic characters outside of being one-dimensional and simple, since it hurt the effectiveness of comedic moments, as the characters exist primarily as vehicles to tell funny jokes.
But as time goes on, we just end up falling into our archetypes, become part of the machine.
If they were more complicated, then a lot of the comedy and silly moments would feel weird because you'd be thinking, why is Ragatha being flanderized for comedy's sake? So instead of trying to have more realistic, down-to-earth comedy that characterizes the characters to make them feel more humanized like real people, it just keeps the episodic, friendly style, which doesn't work when it tries to make genuine moments when we feel for the characters, since outside of the comedy, it also doesn't spend any time building them to feel like real people. By episode 4 and 5, the show tries to give us more deep information about the characters, but everything we've seen from the characters up to that point wasn't us being shown them acting like real people, but instead them acting truly like cartoon characters, one-note archetypes, vehicles for jokes, or even outside the comedy, reminders and reinforcements that these are actually people, like with the Gummy Goo glitch out moment in episode 2. Since the characters don't grow through the comedy and they don't grow them outside of it, they end up not being sympathetic and retaining their one-note qualities from the comedic scenes because of the style of comedy and because that's how we know them best, and it's what we've seen of them the most by far. Zubul is a grumpy one who doesn't like Jax, but that's it. Ragatha tries to be nice to everyone while putting her foot down sometimes, but that's it. Gangle is the depressed one, but that's it. Kinger is a crazy one that becomes a dad-like figure for the others in the dark, but that's it. If instead the show took up a drier, more realistic and slower comedy style like Scott Pilgrim, it could have characterized the characters and made us care about them easily before the therapy and backstory moments. The comic has many funny and memorable moments, but one of the most iconic is when Scott said in surprise during a conversation with Ramona, "Bread makes you fat?" In this scene, they're just talking, and it serves to showcase the chemistry between these two, how they act when they're comfortable, to humanize them, and to characterize them. Scott Pilgrim's made up of tons of little moments like this, comedic or not, and those moments make us genuinely feel for Scott when it seems like he dies to Gideon, or whenever he does bad things, because he feels like a real person, and real people are messy and complicated and complex. Digital Circus actually does this for Jax with his flashback in episode 9, and that's why people actually care about Ribbon and Kaufmo, even though they they only have like 10 minutes of screen time. They are humanized the most because we saw them acting like real people around Jax, which is something that we never really get in the story for anyone else. It's why it felt so bad when Jax suddenly turned on Ribbit due to his traumatic experience with his mom, and it's why it's able to make you feel for her and Kaufmo when they abstract due to Jax's actions. They were humanized through actual small moments while everyone else just isn't. It's hard to feel for characters that you don't know or characters that aren't humanized at all. Why is it expected that I feel anything for Ragatha, this character where her most memorable moments are funny jokes where she gets stabbed by the truck, for example, when she suddenly talks about her mom and they do basically nothing with that later. I don't know her. This show is like that casual friend or acquaintance you only kind of know that just calls you to vent their feelings or whatever they're going through onto you. Sure, I know a little bit about you, but I frankly don't care because I don't know you. If I don't know these characters, then I'm not gonna feel for them because I don't know them. Jax and Pomni plus fake deep. While the other characters are very one note, these other two are a bit more complicated, though I still believe that Jax and Pomni are better utilized for comedy as opposed to a serious story. I've been recommended video after video about Jax because he's the most popular due to being the closest thing to deep or complex, and because the show later centers on Jax and trying to get him to open up. Jax though, due to the trauma he faced from his mother using deep things against him, feels like if he opens up to others, they'll use it against him like his mom. So after he built this fear of closeness, he became mean to keep others away so he can never open himself up to being attacked like that again. It's why he plays the part of making people suffer, or the funny guy, and this playing the part in self-destructive behavior was exacerbated by Ribbit and Kaufmo's abstractions. So he tries to make himself believe he's a cartoon character to keep everyone away. It's genuinely a complicated character flaw mixed with tragedy and trauma, and we get to see every part of his character. Well, I shouldn't have said part of his character because this is Jax's everything. He is this flaw. While it's complicated and we get tons of focus on it, usually complex flaws like this for realistic characters are just part of why the character is the way they are. Bojack from BoJack Horseman is an alcoholic, which originates from his father giving him some way too early, which was a traumatic experience, causing him to later in life use it to cope with his issues just like his father. And outside of that, as a person, he has far more complex flaws like his constant unintentional emulation of his parents, failure to grow as a person, and his self-pity. Even someone like Mob from Mob Psycho has to learn how to control his power, and since he's young, develop into the kind of person he wants to be instead of following what others want him to do. These two characters have multiple complex flaws that in both cases serve to majorly further the main themes and points of their respective stories, and they make them fuller, better, more relatable characters. Jax's flaws, on the other hand, is his identity. He's mean and pushes people away for aforementioned reasons, but since it's more complicated than all the other characters, it makes it easy to feel as if Jax is actually deep and complicated when he's just not. Nonetheless, when Zubul does things like throwing water on Jax in episode 7 after he clearly was unhappy, even though Jax is a huge jerk, because we explicitly learn a lot about him and we understand why he acted the way that he did in episode 6 after his crashing on Pomni, it makes Zubul feel like the jerk because this character that we barely know just threw water on a guy we got development with that's suffering majorly from mental issues, even though the point of the scene is to show that Zubul has friends she can talk to while Jax, due to his actions, doesn't. We probably weren't meant to feel bad for Jax since he's undeniably a jerk, but it makes more sense to feel bad for him than to not, due to these flaws with the story, even though he doesn't compare to actually good and well-rounded characters like the ones I've mentioned previously. So I've talked about Jax but not Pomni, and I wanted to save her in the crash out scene since these two are intertwined. My issue with her is that she's similarly one note, as she functions as a nervous newbie audience surrogate. That makes her a great and effective straight man for the show's style of comedy and for what the point of the show is, which I'll talk about later, but the show wanted to develop her into the emotional anchor or a leader type. They do this all in episode 6 through about 3 scenes with Jax in which they become better friends, and after Pomni hugs him, Jax has his crash up moment where he self-destructs the friendship. Now, the issue with this is that it's all done in episode 6. I'm fine with the idea of Jax having his crashing on Pomni be the catalyst for her changing as a person, but I'm not okay with how they did it because a singular day of building their friendship and a single nice conversation in the episode prior when this is episode 6, i.e. 2/3 of the show, makes no sense. This would have been far less sudden and more believable if from episode 2, Pomni and Jax have been getting consistent moments of getting to know each other, but that's not what we got. Before this episode, we only got moments. Pomni and Jax don't really have a friendship at all, so when he crashes out like this, it feels like an overreaction, since this feels like the reaction of multiple days, or even longer than that, of Pomni and Jax interacting, and Jax realizing what's going on instead of a singular adventure. This ultimately, and with the other flaws, is why I think the show is fake deep. They'll have characters like Gangle speak on their wishes of becoming a webcomic artist, or Ragatha explaining her backstory in many heavily emotional moments as a smokescreen for deep characterization, because the show thinks that giving a character trauma automatically humanizes them, makes you care about them, and is effective in place of actual moments that humanize the characters and make them feel real. While Jax's Crash Out is a perfect example of that, it does that with everybody, even though there's just not much to any of these characters. What is Jax outside of his main flaw? What's Zooble outside of disliking Jax and being grumpy? Or Gangle outside of being sad and so on? Their traumas? That's just one trait and something that's functionally there to enhance the characters. Backstories and traumas for characters are usually explained after you know them, or are an explanation after they do certain actions in order to enhance the meaning of them, or to give you context as to why they act the way they do. Insane example, if you know you know, but in the insane story Eat, the main character Lufria is a creep who's into watching people eat. Though after we get to know him, we learn that he actually developed it due to a traumatic experience of being bitten on the neck and almost killed by a friend, and so that kink formed as a way of coping with that trauma. The story's halfway over by that point of us learning this information, and if it started like that, it'd be far less impactful because the moment functions to give an explanation as to why he's a disturbed person, which enhances the story by giving us more information about a character we've grown to know. Even if the manga never explained this fact, his character would have worked perfectly fine purely because of the characterization and story, as this trauma is a simple additive to understanding why he's the way he is. Trauma or backstories for characters is not characterization, but this show seems to think that it is. Obviousness and childlike nature. Subtlety definitely isn't necessary to make an effective show for adults, and in fact, clear dialogue for a lot of people is necessary for people to get what's going on, since some people just miss the point or subtext of certain scenes and will need it to be spelled out to them. I've used BoJack Horseman as a reference a few times now, and it's hard to say the show's subtle, as like Digital Circus, it'll have characters directly saying how they feel, so everything's very clear to the audience.
I don't believe that's true. And I don't think you believe it's true. I think you want me to tell you that you can be better. And even though you are being a total asshole right now, I still believe it.
It's a very much tell don't show kind of show, but it works because those moments are spaced out well and the characters are genuinely complicated and compelling. It also makes itself fully feel mature thanks to other things like the way it uses cursing, humor, and adult subject matter in a way that still feels like the show trusts your intelligence. Too much subtlety can also easily be a flaw, like with my old comic Narwhalshire. Most things that happen in it were extremely subtle and not told in a clear way, so most people reading it just wouldn't get the importance of certain scenes or what they meant in the greater narrative of the story, which is a massive flaw since it shrinks the potential people who could enjoy or get the story majorly. Most serious adult shows that aren't subtle like BoJack aren't common, as usually shows that are very obvious are made for children so that they can definitely understand what's going on, since with kids shows, trusting the audience's intelligence and maturity doesn't make sense. The thing about Digital Circus is that it's advertised and said to be a show for adults when it really operates more like a children's show. I'd be fine with that if it leaned into it, but it doesn't, as it'll have characters just directly say what they're trying to do or how they feel, so you can't possibly miss the point, come to conclusions on your own, or seriously sink your teeth into what a scene could have meant. Pomni saying,
You need me. I can fix you.
Zooble saying,
And if I do still have problems, I talk about them with the people I trust.
and Gangle saying,
I don't want a career in fast food. I want to be a comic artist and eventually launch my own manga-inspired webcomic.
are all horrendously obvious lines that either restate information we already know about, or they function as shoehorned in obvious lines about how the characters feel, especially Gangle's terribly obvious projection about wanting to be a comic artist, which also goes nowhere in the story. There's so many moments of characters saying directly what they think and what they're trying to do that prove the show just doesn't trust your intelligence, and some lines like when Jax in episode 5 said,
She likes when I'm mean to her, though.
I didn't think you cared about what other people like.
instantly makes it obvious to anybody who has their brain on while watching that, oh, Jax is mean because he's scared of getting close to people, and you'd be correct. The Crash Out is especially an example of this. I've already gone into why it doesn't work narratively, but if we go into the dialogue, we realize we get nothing from it. Or he tells us that Jax is mean to others because he's scared of genuine connection, and it's obscenely obvious that he doesn't mean what he's saying via his body language and absurd, dramatic lines like,
I'm the one who causes pain for fun!
it's a scene that exists purely to be dramatic and to re-establish things we learned about Jax in the previous episode. And what doesn't help throughout this story is the generic motifs like, we'll get through this together, or when Pomni says stuff like,
It hurts, but We still have each other.
while crying as Jax also cries and walks away. Not only is the line corny, but Jax walking away symbolizes for the 1000th time by that point that he's afraid of getting close to people, and now he feels that due to his actions it's impossible to be friends with everyone because of those actions. And that much about his character is clear by the end of episode 6 and 7 especially. And look, I have no problems with shows like this. Shows that are clear and about friendship and upholding basic morals, since the lesson of Digital Circus is clearly about valuing friendships, are fine, but a lot of shows like that are for children for a good reason. Those kind of morals are very basic and important to learn when you're kids, and adults already know about them. Not to mention they're generally very simple themes anyone can grasp, with usually nothing much to sink your teeth into and think about afterwards. Being able to deeply think about a show's themes and messages is a quality that both makes a show deep, mature, impactful, and valuable to adult watchers, and even when kids shows or all ages shows do it, it makes it valuable to adults too. While I enjoy shows like Friendship is Magic, which is a children's show, I enjoy it not for its messaging, which I don't need anymore, but because it's a wholesome kids show through and through, and thus is a nice break from the sometimes very mature and dark comics and shows I watch regularly. And because I enjoy a wide variety of cartoons and comics. But Digital Circus wants to say it's for adults, despite having this message, despite having such obvious dialogue and motifs, and despite its style of characterization and comedy. It's simply a bizarre and unfitting feeling to watch Jax goofily act as an Australian extremist that'll release deadly spiders in America, to Zooble asking to add sex into the circus.
I want the ability to have sex.
Nothing in the show is mature or deep enough for this show to be allegedly targeted towards adults, and because of its vibe, it makes complete sense that tons of slop channels that are targeted to kids commonly use Digital Circus characters. This is really just a kids show masquerading as some deep show for older audiences, when at max you can argue it's for mid-teens. Aimless plot plus Caine. Digital Circus feels colorful and the show is funny, and that's the point, since really the digital aspect of the world is the evil element that was meant to show itself unexpectedly. At least, that's what it initially was going to be. I'm no stranger to dark twists or juxtaposition based stories where things seem colorful and fun before it shows that it's not, as a lot of my most popular videos are reviews of various niche dark twist style stories, and it's initially what I built my channel off of. Digital Circus's hook was so powerful that it got 450 million views on the pilot, and it's actually good in the start. First, we learned that Pomni's attempt to escape the digital world through an exit door was made by Caine. Then in episode 2, we see Gummy Goo and Pomni glitch under the map where the models for Gummy Goo and his friends reside, leading to Pomni explaining that he's not real and Gummy Goo's subsequent existential crisis. Later in the show, 7 does very well with the whole Able trick, and 4 works with the initial idea of Gummy Goo not remembering Pomni due to his memories being wiped, but overall, outside of these moments and mostly gags, the show abandons its original hook and premise. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. A first episode can only set up so much, though it's bad here because it sets up the idea and then almost immediately by episode 3 pivots to being character focused. And as I've already detailed for probably half of the video at this point, the characters suck. With this premise, it wasn't even necessary to make the characters complicated. All they had to do was give real person type reactions whenever the digital world glitches, or for screwed up moments like when Gummy Goo was deleted by Caine. The comedy in that very dark twist carried the show in episode 2 and partially episode 3, not the characters, and that was completely fine. If the show continued being like that, i.e. following what the first episode set up and went through with it, then we could explore far more of the nightmarish parts of the digital world, which are interesting and well done, while the characters still build resentment towards Caine, and it still culminates into the ending part. Even though the characters wouldn't be the main focus, we'd still want them to escape because of how messed up things are, and by the reactions of everyone during screwed up moments, we could have gotten an understanding and consistent reminders that these are real people. That would have made complete sense, but it's not what happened. Instead, the show gives trauma backstories to everyone, focuses majorly on comedy and serious moments, and then by 7, the show's at the point where it feels like it's saying, okay, let's wrap things up, because it never meaningfully spends enough time on one specific aspect of the show for that aspect to feel properly built up. It's like everything's quarter-baked, aside from Caine. Caine's easily the most unique and best character, as his annoyance throughout the series of the characters disliking his adventures, his crash out moment in 8 and the song afterwards fit perfectly because it was actually built up. We even see how tired and frustrated he gets, with 2 and 3 being maps that are fully made by Caine for them to do adventures in, to 3 being made for Zooble, to then ones like 6 where he just gives them guns after they fail to play along with his game idea and tells them to shoot each other, because by then he's fed up.
Or, yeah, we could all just shoot each other. Here, have guns. I don't care anymore.
Caine and all of his moments are genuinely well done, despite me having a really big issue still with his character. The Caine Problem. No, Caine is not a complex character, but he doesn't have to be a very good one within the show. But one thing that completely undermines him is a big issue I have that originates from episode 7. In 7, he's able to effectively fool everybody and the audience into believing Abel is a real person and an admin by using actual flaws and exploitable points in his personality. Abel says things like, "I have a working theory that Caine will commit to a bit no matter what," which is literally how he is in the show, like with how the entirety of episode 4 is Caine accepting the suggestion box idea to make them fast food workers and fully committing to it, and how Abel exploits Caine's want to be liked by the humans. This also means Caine was acting the entire time, one-to-one in a perfect way to how he usually acts to trick Jax and fake glitch until he got the key. Caine playing into his own flaws and using Abel in this way and using his actual room to fool all of them is literally a genius level play. It implies that Caine knows how to get into their heads, screw with them, act, and most importantly, self-reflect. So when Caine previously is consistently characterized before this point and afterwards to be a clueless, somewhat innocent, and unself-aware AI being that works hard and wants the best for everybody, it conflicts. If Caine was as self-aware and smart, he would have certainly changed for the contestants instead of being super annoyed with them if he wanted what's best for them. Or for 2, he's practically pretending that he actually cares about them the entire time. One thing's for certain though is that the Caine that created this genius level adventure and the Caine that can't even understand why Zubul doesn't want to talk to him can't exist. One has a high level of self-awareness and one doesn't. One's so smart that he can trick every single person in the circus into thinking the whole escape thing in 7 is fully real, while the other is too self-centered and clueless to read the room and genuinely hear out others' opinions. Which one is it? I haven't seen anyone bring this up, but this whole crazy high-tier act undermines Caine's whole character, not to mention that we've never seen him make an adventure before or after this that's on this tier of genius. This doesn't at all feel within the realm of what Caine can intellectually do, but let's say that he's secretly this smart. I mean, he as an AI being was somehow able to access and create a program that generates a custom-made body for the head scans of the people that they'd like. If Caine's so smart, then how the hell did he let himself get distracted when Kinger seemed to be gone? No way this almost omniscient being that's also genius that can do anything within this realm couldn't just snap and instantly bring him there. Especially because he wasn't screwing around in the scene at all, instead of crashing out to obvious bait from Pomni and the others. We literally see him just snap Zubul to his location when she hid instead of him looking for them, because he can just fetch and do that. Look, I still think Caine is a good character, and hey, maybe you don't see this as an issue, but I can't get over this because it puts into question his whole character. No Mouth vs. The Circus. I Have No Mouth in Mushgreen by Harlan Ellison from 1967 is one of the most influential science fiction horror stories in history. It's about a supercomputer named Am who was made for the purposes of war, but he gained sentience and hatred for humanity since he had nobody to have experiences like the humans who made him. And so, with the weapons and technology humanity gave him, he killed every human on Earth aside from 5 of them, which he brings down deep into the earth where his vast subterranean cavern system is at, allowing him to manipulate reality instantly with high-level technology in any way he wants, which is an ability he uses to torture the humans that want to escape. He keeps them effectively immortal, forced them to go on random missions or quests, and toys with their minds all for his amusement. Digital Circus by Gooseworks from 2023 is the biggest web series in the entire world. It's categorized by the creator as a psychological horror, and it's about a super advanced AI being named Caine that was created as an experiment, and he's a sentient being that rules over the digital world with 6 humans trapped within it. Caine has godlike abilities and can do anything. Because of his programming, he forces these humans that want to escape to go on adventures he creates since he can manipulate this digital reality in any way he wants to instantly, and all of his subjects are immortal. There are a few differences, especially in genre since Digital Circus isn't a horror, but it's undeniable that the core idea is the exact same with only one big twist to it. Godlike AI tortures nigh immortal humans that want to escape. I don't have a problem with stories that take heavy inspiration from another, but I do have a problem if those stories don't do anything unique or well outside of that inspiration. Dragon Ball started off as a parody to Journey to the West, and it has a lot of references to it from how the early story plays out to Goku's power pool being a clear reference to Wukong's staff, but later developed massively into its own thing during arcs like King Piccolo's, and all of Z is a massive development from the original inspiration and idea to the point that it fully carved out its own identity. Digital Circus also has many references to No Mouth. Kinger's design is clearly a reference to the No Mouth comic where Ted's turned into a jelly thing and he looks like this. Same with the scene where he wanders aimlessly for an unknown amount of time and goes crazy. As in No Mouth, when Ted's turned into a jelly thing, he wanders aimlessly and have no idea how long it's been. Episode 8 very obviously references it twice, with Kinger's song saying "don't need to scream if you ain't got a mouth" and him saying "I am," putting my mind to it with emphasis on am because the main villain of I Have No Mouth is Am, the AI being. But unlike Dragon Ball, which develops massively into its own unique and great story, Digital Circus doesn't develop the one main thing that sets it apart from No Mouth, its digital aspect. It could have explored that digital aspect and made it far more unique, but instead, as I said earlier, it quarterbacks everything. Nothing's really impactful, and it overall falls flat on its face when trying to be its own thing. So it just ends up taking heavy inspiration and then doing nothing actually interesting with it. Even though it has extremely interesting ideas that it was enacting in its first 2 episodes, making it a complete letdown. Even the adventure concept with Caine isn't unique, as in No Mouth, commonly Am will force the 5 humans to go on and do things he created for his own amusement, like them being told to fight the giant flying bird for food. And in the game, literally each 5 characters has adventures custom created for them. Digital Circus literally does exactly this. I mean, this is just, oh my gosh. Terrible ending plus pointless lore. This is one of the worst endings to a show that I've seen because it makes everything pointless. The contestants in the circus are just digital copies of actual people that got their brains scanned into it, meaning that Pomni is a digital entity and a real-life human counterpart exists and is fine in the real world. There is never even a possibility of anyone escaping because they aren't stuck in the digital world, since they are always a part of it. In No Mouth, the story is powerful and compelling due to the lesson and point of it. The humans are subjected to 109 years of torture, forced adventures, starvation and being driven mad, and they seemingly can't do anything about it due to Am being just like Caine. Am can control reality however he wants because of this high level of technology. Everything feels terrible, but by the end in the ice caves, the main character Ted, when Am is distracted, kills everyone to free them from their suffering, even though he easily could have killed himself to relieve himself from the torment alone. But his sacrifice is a point, as it's a message about how humanity will always eventually triumph and help each other, as in humans will always help their fellow man through even the worst case scenarios with sacrifice. The fact that they escape is why it's such a powerful story that's relevant 60 years later, especially with AI becoming so relevant today. And I'm not even explaining the double meaning of No Mouth's name being important to Am and Ted by the end, since in a way, they became the same, or how powerful the mentally fractured narrator really is for the story's impact. Digital Circus is not even in the same cosmos or multiverse as No Mouth when it comes to either complexity or what it's trying to do, especially when we just look at the ending. The people in the circus not even being able to escape undermines the source material and the point of what it was inspired by completely. It's like it took the vibe and concept of No Mouth, copied it, made it kid-friendly and childish, and then never understood why the story works so well. So the characters suck and just cry about nonsense constantly. The premise is basically just a worse, watered-down version of No Mouth, and the plot is aimless, and oh yeah, Jack's the only character that was somewhat developed and made interesting abstracted, so we don't even get to see the character that half the show focuses on survive to the end. All they had to do in Pomni Hug Jax was to make him turn back to normal, and they could have still ended it with implying that he's on a path to recovery and being more open. But no, I hadn't mentioned this, but there are also tons of random meaningless lore teasers we get. The show, in 9 episodes, tried to develop things that take 3 seasons to actually develop satisfyingly. Building the characters could have been season 1 with a small hook and consistent foreshadowing of the disturbing digital aspects being present. Then the disturbing digital aspects could have been the focus of season 2, and throughout those it could have teased deeper info about the setting for season 3 to give us answers about the lore. That would have been genuinely great and I would have loved the show, but instead we get random things that don't get resolved, like what's up with Scratch? What's the blue thing Caine pulls out of his head? What's up with CNA? How did Caine get the photos of the real world? How many people were ever in the circus? Why does it look like there's more abstracted people than we actually see in the show in the pilot? Seriously, with all these weird issues and with this being the literal biggest web series in the world, we have to ask, why is this the biggest web series in the world? Kids. Okay, well, I'd be lying twice if I said the show had no merit or I didn't get why it was so big, but obviously it's kids. Plus the animation quality, of course. If this was just an animatic, it would not be a billionth as big as it is. It's written a lot like a children's show, and despite a few moments, I could easily see a family watching the whole thing. Or at max middle schoolers to mid-teenagers. The show offers emotional moments in a very easy to digest, obvious way, but not genuinely deep or super complex characters. It's all surface level enough for someone who's like 14 to say, wow, that's deep, since they hear about Ragatha's parents, and of course, since they're 14, they don't think about how bland or paper thin her characterization actually is. So the fake deepness works on that kind of crowd, or generally kids, since it's edgy and deep enough to feel cool to them, but it's not deep, slow, or detailed enough like Scott Pilgrim is, where it has tons of scenes of characters just talking and it's really dry. Also, I'm not saying it should be like Scott Pilgrim or anything, in case you get that misconception. What I'm saying is that because of the tone and because of how the stories are like, it attract a different crowd, be it for pacing reasons and whatever happens in the story. That's what I'm saying. Outside of kids, maybe people just find the backstories of characters relatable, or they specifically really like a single character like Jax, or maybe they're more affiliated with fan works, fan fiction, fan comics, and lore analysis as opposed to the actual show, to even people finding Jax's episode 6 crash out effective and enjoying the show for its bigger moments. It's designed to feel impactful and strong, so if you care more about the emotional impact of the scene as opposed to logic, then it could work for you. Not to mention people who watch the show as it naturally released, as opposed to reviewers like me who just binge watched it would like it more, since the paper thin characterization will be far less noticeable and it'd be easier to be hyped that another episode finally came out for fans. Slop animation channels analyzing slop animation channels, and general cartoon reviewers like Saberspark and Theory videos also definitely helped a lot with keeping the show relevant. And I think Gooseworks' own replying to fans and stuff on different websites about the show helped a lot too. Fans being able to directly talk to the creator of something so huge would of course help a ton with engagement in theory crafting, since the creator themselves is right there to answer your questions about the canon of the show or different theories. Because of this, of course, not everyone who enjoys the show is a child, but I think it's obvious that most that actually enjoy it are just silent kid watchers, because by no means is the show actually adult or mature enough to have 450 million views on a planet where mostly older teens and adults are enjoying this. The way it's written is an effective strategy, as feeling like a kid's show and being kid-friendly just enough while seeming deep, having occasional sense of cursing, and jokes like the Zooble sex one is perfect for tons and tons of success. I mean, just look at things like Hazbin Hotel or Hell of a Boss. Neither of those shows are mature either, but it effectively targets a middle school type audience, which is why it has so many fans despite how raunchy and sexual both shows can be, which ironically is perfect for that specific audience. But it's still a writing flaw because it's technically classified as an adult animated show like Hazbin or Helluva, and when something is classified like that, I'd expect something more mature, less obvious, and more subtle, so I can probably sink my teeth into the work and think about the deeper meaning and potentially complex themes. And for clarification's sake, I'm not saying every single adult show has to have super deep themes or complicated ones like that. My main problem is that Digital Circus says that it's for adults, but it does not at all properly actually tackle anything deep or do anything deep. Instead, it's very on the nose, it's very not subtle. After you watch the show, there's nothing to really think about, because when you watch it, that's pretty much it. Like, there's nothing really to think about outside of it. And I guess you could theory craft, but if you just theory craft all day, you're just basically making up headcanons all day, and you're not really thinking about what the actual themes of the show were, because when you watch it's so obvious. Again, I'm not saying every single adult show has to do deep themes, but a big strength of mature writing in adult shows is that they can more easily go into more complicated themes and other sort of things that you really have to sink your teeth into and think about. They can really explore all kinds of different things that kids shows just can't, because they're kids shows and the target audience wouldn't get it, or it'd just be too much for them to actually interpret. Adult shows don't always have to be deep. I mean, I enjoy things like 12 Ounce Mouse, but that's pretty much my point with this. Digital Circus is trying to be deep, but it fails. And it's trying to be deep as a show for adults, but as a show for adults, with it trying to be deep, it just completely fails. Conclusion. Digital Circus definitely isn't the worst web series I've reviewed or anything, as I've talked about things like Pork Chop and Flash Green, Pretty Blood, and The Bedfellows, which are all terrible shows that are far worse than this. But it's still a bad show, and outside of children, I'm not fully sure who this is for. If Digital Circus simply focused on what its premise was instead of going into a bizarre, aimless direction and was fully child-friendly, then I'd probably have liked the show because it did a lot of good things. But as a finished series, it just isn't good. This is probably the last time I'll talk about a mainstream cartoon for a long time, since after this, I'm going to talk about Alfred Alford and get back to the niche and old. But nonetheless, if you enjoyed this review, then subscribe and become a member for $1 if you want early access on videos or extra non-scripted videos. I'll see you guys in my next one, and here are the current channel members. Have a blessed day, everybody, and goodbye.